Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Melrose School Committee. The date is November 23rd, 2021. The time is approximately 7 p.m. My name is Jen McAndrew. I'm the chair, and this meeting is being broadcast live and recorded by MMTV with our thanks. For purposes of taking the roll, will you please, taking attendance, will you please call the roll, Ms. Hogan?
Mr. Obremski?
Yes, present.
Mia Broder?
Here.
Ms. Driscoll?
Here.
Mr. O'Connell?
Here.
Ms. Rozzi Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Selm?
Here.
And Ms. McAndrew?
Here, and with 7 members here, we are ready to proceed. Let us stand as we are able for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent, thank you all. We do not have our student representatives with us this evening. I believe they are probably at homecoming. Very exciting that the homecoming dance is taking place tonight, and thank you to everyone who made that happen for this and with the students, including the leadership of the student government. Next up, we have a public comment portion of our meeting. This is the portion of the meeting where members of the public may comment for up to 3 minutes each on matters before the committee. We did not receive any requests for remote participation in public comment today. Mr. O'Connell, I do not believe we have any in person, but so without objection, public comment is open. Seeing no members of the public interested in speaking tonight, without objection, public comment is now closed. Thank you all. At this time, I would entertain a motion, if it's the will of the committee, to move forward educational programs and personnel.
So moved.
Second.
Made by Ms. Driscoll, seconded by Ms. DeSelm. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that motion carries unanimously. We will move forward to EP&P with Mr. O'Connell, and then we will come back to the rest of our agenda. Thank you all.
Hello, Superintendent. Nice to see you. All righty, educational programs and personnel. First up, Melrose High School athletics waivers requests. One is with regard to gymnastics. It's an 8th grade waiver. The second is with regard to girls hockey. It's a middle school 7th and 8th grade waiver. And I believe we have Mr. Fogarty here with us. Nice to see you, Mr. Fogarty. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I come before you to request a waiver for gymnastics, an 8th grade waiver. We currently have, I believe it's 8 students in the high school signed up to play. It's very difficult to compete with the schedule that we have with only 8 students, so we're looking to have 8th graders join that roster. And we're also looking to have some 7th and 8th graders join the girls hockey team. We currently have 7 students signed up to play this winter. The last 2 seasons we've been with Stoneham High School in a co-op, which kind of ran its course, and we want to try to stand on our own skates again and give it a shot.
Very good. Superintendent, you content?
Yes.
Very good. Any comments or questions? Ms. Driscoll, please.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Ms. Driscoll, seconded by Mayor Broder. Any discussion? Please, Ms. Rozzi Thomas.
I have one quick question. If it's 7th and 8th graders, is that true for hockey as well as gymnastics?
No, for gymnastics, we're seeking just a 8th grade waiver.
Okay.
For the hockey, we're looking for what's called a middle school waiver, which would include 7th and 8th grade waivers.
Are there any concerns about, safety or injury based on this big disparity in ages from 12th graders down to 7th?
It's a valid point. I don't see it being an issue in girls hockey. If it was boys hockey, if it was a more physical sport, the rules don't allow as much contact as they do in other sports. The 7th and 8th grade waiver in hockey is something that's usually done. It's something we've avoided for years, and the numbers is difficult to justify. We may have enough with eighth graders, but it's going to be very close. Safety-wise, quite often that female performer, is at the top of her game in the 9th grade and the 10th grade, so that 7th grader is closer to that hockey player. So,
Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Selm, please.
Thank you, Mr. Fogarty. I support this. If you could verify, as I recall, as a former ice hockey referee, women's hockey does not have any checking where men's hockey does. While that doesn't preclude rubbing out along the boards or any of those boards scrums, or of course clearing out in front of the net, there's no open ice checking. The precedence for checking in general is, well, it's a penalty in women's hockey. So I assume that would make the size difference and the age difference somewhat null.
correct.
You would still have issues with regards to speed and strength, as I would expect. But the girls that are playing, would look to be playing here have probably been playing since they were peewees or mites.
Correct.
I'm absolutely fine with this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Seeing none on the motion to approve these waivers, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Mr. Fogarty, thank you very much for
So
the
if you
work.
could hang on for 1 second.
Please, yes.
It's for, it's rivalry week. It is big games on Thursday. One final plug for where to get tickets and where the game's going to be and all that stuff.
Certainly. Tickets are on sale in the lobby of Melrose High School for the Thanksgiving Day game. I believe it's the 101st meeting of Melrose in Wakefield. It's the 63rd meeting for Thanksgiving. Tickets are also on sale in the mayor's office and at Gray's Appliance. I would encourage everybody to get their tickets ahead of time. They are $5 for students and senior citizens ahead of time. They are $7 for adults ahead of time. All tickets are $10 at the gate, and there will be a long line up in Wakefield. So please get them ahead of time.
Very good.
Another side note to that is the vocational school, Northeast Voc, is hosting Manchester Essex on the same day, also in Wakefield. Parking is going to be at a premium. You should be up there by 9:30 in the morning, 9:45 for a kickoff at 10:15.
Great. Great info and great advice. Thank you for that. And thank you, as always, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Next up, statewide test results with Dr. Adams and company. Thank you all for being with us. And if everyone could introduce themselves, that would be great.
I'm Margaret Adams, Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning.
Laurie Greenwood, Director of Math for grades 6 through 12.
Good evening, Nora Tsoutis, Director of English, 6 through 12.
Melissa Rice, Director of Science, Tech, and Engineering, grades 6 through 12.
Just so you all know, these don't amplify. They're just for the TV.
Got it.
So you're saying to use our teacher voices?
Absolutely. Always. It works on me.
Yes, please.
So you received a lot of material from us. We promised to be brief and just provide sort of a general overview of some of our findings, and then open it up for your questions. So some of the essential questions that sort of guided the leadership team's analysis of the MCAS results was thinking about the performance of our subgroups. We also wanted to think about the impact of the pandemic on student performance. We also wanted to look at previous years. We also wanted to make comparisons to current fall assessment data and what that was showing us, and think thoughtfully about next steps for acceleration of student learning. Some background information is the state did not offer any updated district or school accountability determinations this fall. It's also important to note that students in grades 3 through 8 took a shorter test. They took only one session, and they were assigned to either the one session or another session. Although, despite the shorter tests, the state does say that comparisons across previous years are reasonable. However, there may be more variability in individual student performance because this test was shorter. Just a reminder, you've heard this before from us and as well as the superintendent about our goal this year to really focus on acceleration, using just-in-time scaffolds, and really providing students access to their current grade level content through our instructional practices instead of remediation, which is, by research, a poorer practice to use to address learning loss. And again, you've heard this before, but just a reminder, our 3 goals this year really focus on providing for a sense of belonging, really supporting social emotional learning needs of our students, monitoring student understanding using formative and summative assessments all year long so that we can adjust instruction, and then providing for strong instruction that includes those just-in-time scaffolds that allow us to remediate student needs but also accelerate and move them forward. We'll start with English Language Arts.
Good evening. So what we did see is that the pandemic did impact test scores, and this happened across the state. So when we look at grades 3 through 10, what we saw is that although many students did meet and exceed expectation, there were quite a few students in the partially meeting and not meeting expectations category. So when we look at grades 3 and as we go up to 8, we saw those numbers increase slightly this year. But when we get to 10, it was interesting that we actually did see students did well, and so that was something that we were pleased with. And we also saw that compared to the state, Melrose did perform above the state average, and so that's something important to note. When we were looking at the data, we did notice our subgroups. There was disproportionality with our students with disabilities, so when we were looking at the data, that was something that we noted and were thoughtful about how we were going to work with our students as we were moving forward. And the same thing with students with high needs, and when we look at the subgroup breakdown, students with high needs, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, our African American students, are students that we want to pay close attention to and make sure that we support as we move forward this year. So that was our general, when we did our data dives, when we looked at it with our teachers, that's what we noticed.
Just to give an update on some, and so we did this in the information we gave you a synopsis of the MCAS results, but tried to also provide you some information about fall data so that the spring MCAS data is already is dated, and so we really want to see where our students are right now and how we move them forward. So this is a snapshot of some of the more data that we gave you of the oral reading fluency subtests of the DIBELS 8th edition that we're using. And just to note that the DIBELS 8th edition is new for us. In the past, we had used DIBELS Next. The DIBELS 8th edition helps us better meet the state's requirements around dyslexia screening. It is one of their approved screeners used in K through 5. This gives you a snapshot of one subtest that's given grades 1 through 5. And you'll notice the colors. We want our students to be in the green and the blue, low risk to minimal risk. And when we combine those two numbers, we want that number to be at least 80%. Obviously, we aim for 100, but we at least want that number to be 80% when you combine the yellow and the green. One of the things we are noticing, if you look at grade 1 and 2, you'll notice a larger number of students at risk and some risk in the red and the yellow. This is unusual for us. We always do see summer slide. We see kids slide from the spring to the fall, and we'll see those numbers be a little larger. But that 32% at risk is much larger than we've ever seen. This was done at the end of September, mid-September. We are progress monitoring our students who are in the red and the yellow, and we're already starting to see progress. We met last week with all K through 5 teachers in every school and walked through the current data that they're seeing from their students, and we're starting to see students make progress. But you can see that the impact of the pandemic on our youngest students really clearly in this slide in grades 1 and 2.
What we also introduced this year for the first time is the Iready platform for the ELA students. And so what that did is it provided us real-time data immediately. So we had the MCAS data that teachers looked at, grades 6 through 12, and now we had the diagnostic that let us know where our students were. So we found out which students were on grade level, which students were below grade level, and even further, we were able to look at the domains in the areas that students needed the most support. And so what we found is our students really needed support with vocabulary, literature, and informational text. And so what that allows our team to do is to provide targeted support for the students. So we have our preliminary data from September, we're progress monitoring our students, and we're actually seeing progress as well. And we're trying to push our students to get the supports that they need. And the teams are looking at the data as it comes in real time. So with the DIBELS, students in grade 1 and 2 did have quite a bit of at-risk, and we did see that with the Iready, it aligned with the data that we saw with MCAS, so it allowed us to really be strategic as we were moving forward to make decisions about our next steps.
As next steps, we're progress monitoring all our students who are at risk and some risk in grades K through 5, as well as 6 through 8 in Iready. So those are those little formative and summative assessments that are giving us feedback about how our interventions and our instruction is working. We want to bring teachers back to the high leverage, research-based literacy strategies we all know they've done in previous years before pandemic, and we want to really leverage those with staff and saying, let's get back into routines that get students reading and writing, lots of reading and writing. Reviewing the data with staff on an ongoing basis throughout the school year. You all invested in the budget for academic interventionists at each elementary school. Those are folks that are working to provide those first and second graders that you saw. They're providing small group, research-based reading intervention at least 4 times a week to those students. And we're monitoring those students' progress through the data to make sure that those interventions are effective in moving them forward.
And for the 6 through 12, same thing. We are working as a team to make sure that practices are consistently happening in grades 6 through 12. Teachers are meeting as in teams, and they're making sure that they're collaborating together. We're seeing accountable talk, we're seeing annotation, we're making students are using the 4 domains of language consistently in the classroom because we want to consistently push them to grow. We are using A block as an intervention block, but we're also using the data in real time, again, to inform what we're doing. So if we see that students need additional support, we can make changes to the schedule and are making changes to the schedule so that students get what they need. To address some of the subgroup data that we saw, we are working collaboratively with Amy Jackson in the METCO program, and we will be offering some workshops to students after school so that they can get additional support so that we can address those needs. And we're making sure that Flex Block is being utilized effectively, so students have the opportunity to really get personalized instruction, get the support from their teachers as they need it so that they can grow. And we are continuing to monitor with the Iready platform, and we're excited because math had the MyPath grant. We were able to get a pilot for the rest of the year, and so we're excited that the students in the ELA will also have that opportunity to get that extra support through that program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to say Nora did such a good job that I'm just going to say ditto. Margaret's going to kill me tomorrow. Okay, so we see some very similar things in mathematics. The pandemic clearly had an impact on math scores in all areas. Everything shifted a bit, with the exception of 7th grade, actually. When I went back and looked at it again, 7th grade was almost exactly the same as 2 years ago, but everyone else had a little bit of a shift down. To me, that's completely expected given the nature of last year. So we did see more students in the partially meeting and not meeting expectations category, but we still had the vast majority of our 10th graders pass the MCAS first try, which to me was a big success. When we look at our high needs populations, we see the same thing. We have a lot of students that were in the partially meeting and not meeting expectations category. And similarly with students with disabilities, we see a high percentage of students that are in that category and are not meeting expectations on the MCAS from 2021. When we look at the disproportionality in our data, we do see that it clearly exists in mathematics. This has been something that's been around for years. This is not new, but it is something that we need to continue to work on. Something that is of note is that last year in the middle school, we did not have math lab or math intervention due to the schedule that we had because of COVID. We did not have that A block for that. And so to me, that is a place where we see these students generally receive a lot of the support during that A block math lab and math intervention. And that was just something that we couldn't fit into the schedule last year for obvious reasons. So we definitely see that the pandemic impacted mathematics. A majority of students with disabilities, high needs, economically disadvantaged, all did not meet those benchmarks. And in 7th and 8th grade, another thing to note, as Margaret mentioned at the beginning, students were randomly assigned to one of 2 sessions for the MCAS, and so students were randomly assigned to either the calculator or the no calculator section, but those were taken in the same classroom. So within the same classroom, some students had a calculator to use for their session, and some students didn't. And so that may or may not have had an impact on some students seeing their peers with a calculator or not. So students took 2 completely different sessions of the test. So that is something that stands out to me. We've used Iready for 3 years now in the middle school. So the current 8th graders have used it for all 3 years that they've been in middle school. That's when we started using it. Is that the same in elementary? Yeah. So that was 3 years ago we started using it. So those students in 8th grade have had it for 3 years. And we can see our Iready data is showing that, and I'm going to go to the next slide because this shows anything in green and yellow is good because that means that students came into the year at the appropriate grade level. So the students that were coming into 6th grade, if they're in yellow, that means they came in at the end of the 5th grade level. So they came in at the appropriate place. So the way that it codes it as 1 grade level below is that they're coming in with 5th grade skills into the 6th grade is what you want to see. So we are seeing that with the exception of 8th grade, about 80% of our students are coming in at the appropriate grade level. So that to me is very promising. So when we're looking at the disproportionality between MCAS and Iready, I actually noticed that there wasn't as much disproportionality in the Iready data. There were more students in that green and yellow when compared to the MCAS. So that's an interesting non-correlation, I guess, that we would be looking at for that. So that's something that we're always looking at is why is that happening? But we've got spreadsheets galore with all of that data in it, and we're using that pretty consistently in the middle school. Some next steps that we're looking at, as Nora mentioned, we have the Iready platform has a built-in MyPath, which is personalized lessons based on your diagnostic. So if a student is placed at the, say, 4th grade level, they're going to be working on those appropriate 4th grade skills, and then it'll move up as they progress through them. So the MyPath is a great tool that we have right now that really allows students a personalized dive into the mathematics that they need. And similarly in the ELA that we were able to get the free pilot for that, which is great. So that is a really important piece, and we're using that a lot in Math Lab, but all of the teachers are using that within their classrooms as well to get students that extra support that they need personalized for themselves. We're meeting and doing data meetings consistently. We continue to really emphasize those core instructional practices that are good for students. We're using that A block, that Math Lab again, which is huge for me to have that back. Those students are placed into Math Lab based on need, and so they're getting that second class of support, and I'm hopeful that that will be really a big impact on their success in mathematics. And then we also have a few cool things going on. We've got some STEM pathway students that Melissa and I presented on Parent U last week, and that was one of the things we talked about. Our STEM pathway students are awesome, and we have them, they set up a tutoring club that's hopefully launching next week, and each grade level will have 2 to 3 STEM pathway students available for homework help after school, which is super exciting. And then we also have Natural Honor Society and STEM students that are always available for tutoring that we can set up on a one-on-one basis, small group, et cetera. All right.
Can I interrupt real quick, because I just have a
Please.
very technical question. Do you guys, I think everyone else was here 3 years ago, with the exception of me. Can you give me like a 1 or 2 sentence nutshell on what Iready is?
Sure. Iready is a platform that allows us to assess. It's done via the computer, so the students log in. They take a diagnostic assessment at the beginning, middle, and end of year. That diagnostic places them somewhere and says, these are the standards and these are the things you need. It does it across the 4 domains of math, number and operations, measurement, geometry, and algebraic thinking. And then MyPath, which is new for us, we were able to get MyPath through a grant we wrote this summer from the state. It's available to every 1 through 8th student. It takes those results and creates personalized lessons for that student. So say the student is struggling with multiplication. There's a personalized lesson for them with videos as well as activities and manipulatives. It's pretty engaging in the students, and we also get real-time data. So if a student is working on their multiplication and they start to struggle, the teacher gets an alert to say, hey, they're working on this, they're struggling, they need more teaching. So it gives us real-time data, as well as the students are taking little benchmarks in between those 3 like fall, winter, and that's giving us additional data on the progress students are making. So it's a little bit of time on the computer with a lot of data that we're gathering, in addition to all of the other formative and summative assessments teachers are doing on a daily basis and the feedback they're getting from students.
Excellent. Thank you, and sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so moving on to science, we're seeing similar trends. The effect of the pandemic is definitely impacting our students' performance overall on the MCAS test. We're seeing a shift, again, similar to an ELA in math, of more students partially meeting expectations and not meeting expectations. So that's typically a 4 to 7% shift through those 3 grade levels that we're seeing. The one thing to note is 9th grade students took a legacy test. The new next generation test was not released by DESE, so the students were taking the previous legacy test with overlapping standards from the previous science frameworks and the new science frameworks. So hopefully this year we'll see that new next generation test in place. But that's a little different. It was scored a little differently, so the titles for scoring are a little different and using advanced and proficient and needs improvement instead, but the same trend exists there. Again, as we look at our subgroups, we're seeing that disproportionality again. Similar to math and ELA, we're really seeing it increase in the middle school and 8th grade, and then we're gaining ground and we're closing that gap in 9th grade or in the high school as well with our high need students, with our students with disabilities. And again, when we start looking at our subgroups, we're seeing that same trend occur from grades 5 to 8, where we're seeing a little bit of a dip in our students, especially in the economically disadvantaged category, African American subgroup. Our Hispanic subgroup, there was not a large enough sample size in the middle school, and that's one thing to note. The science test was the 3rd test that students took when they were welcomed back to school. So I noted in the middle school, about 40 less students took it by that 3rd test when they'd welcome back. So that was interesting and kind of impacted some of our numbers on our subgroups. We didn't have enough of student population to report out some data in places there. So looking at the general conclusions that we're seeing, again, we're seeing that same shift to the right. We're seeing definite disproportionality increasing from 5th grade to middle school, and then kind of gaining and decreasing and closing the gaps in 9th grade. And just, again, seeing a disproportionality existing in our subgroups and more students not meeting or partially meeting expectations in any of the benchmark categories. So looking forward
and thinking about our next steps. At the elementary school, we're reviewing and implementing new FOSS units. With teachers, we're revising life science units throughout this school year. Looking in grade 6, we're progress monitoring on a regular basis. A lot of the data that math and ELA is collecting is very helpful because we're thinking about the science practices and using computational thinking. We're thinking about explaining, making arguments, just working through a lab or an activity or a concept. So many of the things are overlapping. So a lot of the Iready and other data that you're hearing about is helpful not only just for those disciplines, but across the board as well to support all students. As a department at the secondary, we're really focusing on universal design for instruction and really creating those extra scaffolds in place for those problem solving, those explaining, accountable talk moves, and really getting kids engaged and being able to use hands-on equipment again, right? We couldn't do that last year, whether students were remote or even in person. There was a magical date at the end of the year where we suddenly could share equipment again. So students are very much enjoying being able to really actively engage and do science. And that's been so wonderful to see their questions and their curiosity.
I think the last thing before we take questions that I would just highlight is the disproportionality really makes the equity work that we're doing really important, and hopefully at some time in the future we can share some of those goals with you. One of those goals is really intentionally looking at our formative and summative assessments on an ongoing basis through the lens of equity. So the Iready data allows us, we can look at, because of the platform, we can look at the data by race, students with disabilities and high needs. And often doing that kind of analysis required so much work behind the scenes, and now we can immediately do that with teachers. As well as we've been able to use, with the help of Ms. Acevedo, Google Data Studio to look at our DIBELS results also by race. So we can have teachers look at the results and say, let's look at how our students with disabilities looks like. Let's look by gender. Let's look by race. Instead of waiting for this MCAS assessment to give us some of that information. So we can have conversations with teachers about the trends that we're seeing, as well as school leaders and district leaders. We're looking at that data to say, consider what resources or what do we need to do to support individual teachers or individual schools as well. And so that's important and different for us, and we're hoping that helps us accelerate and meet some of that disproportionality that we're seeing.
Very good.
Any questions?
Thank you all very much. That was a terrific presentation, and let me note that the packet materials were also terrific and very comprehensive and much appreciated. Mr. Obremski, please.
Looking at the grade 1 DIBELS scores, I know it's, looking at the grade 1 DIBELS scores, I know it's not something Melrose is used to in the context of the almost 1/3 kids not meeting that benchmark. But I think it's pretty typical of what's happening, in the state, probably nationally. But can you just amplify what is happening in the schools to try to have the children reach that benchmark?
Sure. So we met with the teachers in the fall, and we looked at that data. At those meetings, we developed intervention groups. So any student in the red is certainly in an intervention group serviced by an academic interventionist. And we have interventions that we've used for a long time and have been highly effective for us. Project READ in K through 3, linguistics, and grades 4 for 5 if students need a phonics intervention. And in fluency in the upper grades, we use Read Naturally. And some students who are in the yellow are getting some interventions. But with the classroom teachers, we also talk about how do you structure the literacy blocks so that all students have access to the whole group and are getting access to the grade level content. And then we're structuring our literacy blocks so that students are getting small group. The magic happens in the small group with the teacher providing direct instruction that meets those particular needs of the student. As well as building up routines and practices for students to read and write, and really building up student stamina. One of the things you'll hear teachers say across K through 12, and certainly in the primary grades, is student stamina is much less than in previous years. And we're having to build slowly student stamina for work, independent work. Just talking to a 9th grade world language teacher and just noticing that the students just don't have the attention to doing independent tasks for long periods of time. So we're working up and building up those skills as the year goes on. And like I said, last week we met with all teachers, grades K through 5. We went to all elementary buildings. And we're starting to see kids who were in the red in the fall are now in the yellow or now in the green. And there are some kiddos who are, still struggling, but they've made some incremental progress. And those are the kids we now want to say, okay, what else can we do to move them forward so that we continue to see the trajectory moving up. And we're very proud of the work the teachers have done in the past 3 months. And to see so much progress in just 6 to 8 weeks was just amazing and really gratifying. But we still have more to go, and we're confident, being diligent to some of this work, we'll see that trajectory continue to go up.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, did you have your hand up?
I did. So one thing that you just said that I want to drill down on just a touch is, so it's if kids have an earlier fatigue threshold or, a shorter attention span than pre-pandemic, I think folks' natural reaction is if there is a deficit, more instruction is the answer, but it doesn't sound like that necessarily is certainly the whole answer, that it's not that simple. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
No. I think it's, we want to continue, it's sort of this idea, we want to continue moving students in, they're still learning they're learning about multiplication, but if, for example, if I'm teaching multiplication and students are still struggling with some of their addition facts, that kind of addition kind of lays the foundation for some of the work they're doing in multiplication, because multiplication is repeated addition. You're doing that, you're introducing that concept, but you're also building that other previous concept. You're building up that muscle. What allows, the Iready will allow us, especially in math, to identify what those gaps are, which kids have those gaps, so that teachers can intervene in small groups. So I'm going to pull those students who need that repetition or remediation, and I'm going to give them that mini lesson. And then we also have this tool, MyPath, that's also providing instruction and data. And so all of those pieces are like coming together, including student stamina for doing some of this work. And we're seeing it come together now, and we're hoping, and we know we've already seen progress of the students, and we're hoping that trajectory continues. We're confident we're headed in the right direction.
A quick question, I think, about academic interventionists. What is that in more specific terms? It is an additional teacher body in the classroom to give specific supports? Is it something different than that?
We were so blessed. I'm not sure how we found an amazing group of educators. These are 18 and a half hours a week, $30 an hour. They usually work 4 days a week, usually like 8:30 or 9 to 1, and they fill out the week with 18 and a half. They meet with groups of students every 30 minutes, so they're usually in the classroom because there's no space anywhere else. And they're going into a classroom, pulling a group of students, providing direct instruction, and then moving on to another classroom. And those folks we provided, you'll see in the report we outlined that we provided training for them at the beginning of the year. We purchased some materials, so everybody has materials that they need in order to be successful. We're providing them with some coaching so that they have someone to monitor. We want to make sure we have fidelity to the intervention, that they're implementing it with fidelity and they have someone they can ask questions, so we're intervening with some support for them. And their impact is really being felt.
And you mentioned some, thank you for that, but you mentioned, I think towards the top of the presentation about some additional time in learning or after-school learning for Metco kids.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, really, how does that work in terms of the transportation issues? Is that
So Amy Jackson is fantastic, and so we spoke, we tried to discuss the needs, and there's a bus after school at 4 o'clock, so we have that window of time that we can structure the units and lessons to meet the needs of the students so that they can stay after school and do that. So we're excited about that.
Awesome.
And so we found some teachers that are willing to provide these workshops, and we decided that we have this data now and we know what students need, but we also have teachers who are so collaborative together and work really hard to make sure that students' needs are met. And so I think that the collaboration between the English department, Amy Jackson with the METCO program, and the teachers in the school together, I think just having that communication is important and making sure that we're setting up the program to meet the needs of students. And so I think we'll be in very good position.
It also reminds me at one of the groups that was disproportionately impacted, but it's smaller, so they don't necessarily appear in the MCAS data, is our English language learners. And so at the Lincoln, through Title III, we're funding an after-school program that meets 3 times a week. We had some teachers who are working 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, and we were just able, I think they're going to start after Thanksgiving, 5th grade. So those students can stay till 4 o'clock with the classroom teacher, a teacher, participate in some homework support, but also do some additional reading and math to hopefully also help support them in accelerating their learning.
So in terms of all the data aggregation that we now have the ability to do with some of these tools, is it possible, I'm not even sure it's a good idea, but is it possible to analyze performance outcomes, essentially based on choices made during the pandemic about what type of instruction a student was receiving, meaning, fully remote versus a hybrid versus maybe something else?
So the MCAS allowed us to do that, and you'll see in the report that in ELA, I don't think there was any impact of whether they were remote. Oh, this is whether they took the assessment remotely or not. We're assuming the kids who took it remotely were probably learning remotely. In ELA, there was very little impact of whether you were in remote or in person. In math, there were 2 grade levels, and I want to say it was 4th and 8th, but now I can't remember, that there was a slight difference. Can't remember. There's a little bit of a difference, but the students who were remote, the numbers are very small. They're like 40 kids compared to 260 or 230, so it's hard to make the comparison.
That's my sense. Last question, did a lot more kids opt out of MCAS or refuse to take whatever the proper terminology is?
Than usual, yes. The percentage rates, if you look online, are like 94, and we're usually much higher. There's a couple of subgroups where you can see the number drop to like 75, but that's a particular subgroup in certain places. So it is a little less.
I appreciate all the information. My apologies for the length of the questions. There's a lot of good data here. Very, very much appreciated.
Mr. Selm, please.
Thank you. Through the chair to the panel, thank you so much for this data. I actually had a couple different questions in and around the METCO comment. That was on slide 18. So first, all through the presentation, there's a discussion around African American students, Hispanic students, and other categories, and how there's a 20% gap, right? And they have specific needs for improvement. And yet this slide is the only slide that mentions METCO specifically. And I'm curious as to why single out METCO versus any of the classes. And so then the question comes, is the after-school literacy for all students that need it, but we've made specific accommodations for the METCO students to be able to attend it, or extrapolating the other way, do the METCO students get access to other supports across the math and the science that is not identified there, but is specifically mentioned in the English language arts? So it's kind of a multi-pronged question here.
So I think, in terms of the approach, we want to make sure that 6 through 12, every student in every school, in both schools, is getting access to all of the resources. So We want to make sure that opportunities are available, but we also want to make sure that when we have resources available to us, like the METCO program and a partner in the schools, that if we can partner together to add additional programs, additional resources, additional time, that we leverage that. So I think that was the intent of that additional resource. Does that mean that it's happening in the classrooms, it's happening with teachers, all the teachers are collaborating together, but really it's to leverage a program that already exists and to create a partnership between the English department and the METCO program.
I think if you also ask Amy Jackson, she would say the pandemic had an impact on many of her students. So we were also, because Amy also has access to her MEDCO grant that allows us to provide additional supports, she often sets up, for example, she'll set up tutoring that happens in Boston, so students can access that in the evening or on the weekends. We were being very intentional to provide a means to accelerate learning because they were also, many MEDCO students were remote, and I think they felt the impact. And I think if you asked her, she feels many of her students felt the impact. And so we were trying to provide another means and using the MEDCO grant and the resources to provide another means of accelerating learning for a particular group of students.
So generally speaking, across the entire METCO program, there's further supports being given, and Amy Jackson is doing a fantastic job, as I understand, anyway. So that's awesome to hear. Surely we also have supports for those African-American students who are Melrosians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're not blanket one versus the other and that we're being inclusive here.
Yeah, and so for ELA at the middle school, the same structure of the A block that occurs for math also occurs for ELA. So there are students who might be receiving for like the first trimester an ELA intervention, so it's an additional block for how many days is that? 45 days, for 45 days. And they may stay in that intervention all year long, or they may move on and say, oh, it's not needed anymore, or they may go to a math intervention, or they may stay in a math intervention all year long, based upon the teacher recommendation, working with guidance, and as well as using the assessment data as well.
Very good, thank you.
Ms. McAndrew, please.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for being here. It's great to see you. Thanks for this presentation and for the lengthy report as well. My first sort of set of questions is around the 10th grade and the graduation requirements. So I'm interested in, particularly with regard to math, where the numbers meeting exceeding, so therefore meeting the graduation requirement across the board is lower than in ELA, and particularly low for students with disabilities and high needs. So my first question is, which means those students will have to take it again. And so how does that, I guess my first question is, how do those numbers in math, particularly for the subgroups, compare with previous years? Is our experience that those students do tend to need to take it more than once?
So it's actually, if a student's score is not meeting, they have to retake it, and then there's a score threshold. So within that partially meeting, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's very low. So it's basically, it's the not meeting and then a very small portion of the partially meeting that have to retake it. So there was only, so this is 6% of students were not meeting. I believe it was 7% had to retake it. So it's just a very small portion of the not partially meeting. Most of those kids in the partially meeting were above that, whatever that cutoff number is, which I don't know off the top of my head. They are on an EPP, an educational proficiency plan, which based on our graduation requirements, which is 4 years of math, including Algebra 2, all students are covered in that. So as long as the students that were in that partially meeting category complete 4 years of math, including Algebra 2, then they meet the graduation requirement. So even though the categories are meeting, exceeding, it's actually the majority of the partially meeting also meet the graduation requirement, just based on our graduation requirements for this, based on Mass Core requirements. I hope that made
Yes,
sense.
that's super helpful, thank you. And does that apply also to the students with disabilities? Because 67% are in the partially meet.
Right, but that's for a smaller number. So the students with disability is, I don't know, maybe 40 students. So 40 students, that's whatever the percentage is that were in the not meeting, then is part of that.
No, I get that. I'm just wondering if that is like consistent with previous years. Like, are we used to seeing like only 14% of our students with disabilities in 10th grade passing the MCAS, meeting or exceeding the MCAS?
Yes.
Okay.
It probably was a little, it's
little
probably a
higher.
little higher this year, but I'm not, it's not by much.
It's not far off.
It just
The
jumped
other-
out to me as the difference between the ELA and the math in that grade level in those subgroups.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's been consistent. I think
Okay.
that's been consistent. I think what was happening, we were narrowing the gaps, and we could see it in math. We were narrowing the gaps, and we were working. It was incremental, but we were working at it, and I think the pandemic just increased it again. And so for many of us, including the teachers, it feels like, oh, we're starting over again, trying to address all of those gaps. In addition to the social, emotional, like learning needs that include the executive functioning and organizational skills that students are still developing stamina for. And you can see the impact of that at the high school. You can certainly see it in some ninth graders. And then you can certainly see it in our grades 8 and below.
I think the other thing to remember too is that we've only done 2 years of the new next-gen MCAS at the 10th grade level. So if we go back to before that, it was a completely different test and a completely different scaling system. So we really have just 2019 to look at for that direct comparison. And yes, there was an increase for sure, but I mean, a lot of the students that didn't meet expectations were students who had attendance issues last year. So it's not terribly surprising, some of that. I actually, if I can be completely honest,
Please.
I was pleasantly surprised with how few students didn't pass. So I was expecting more based on just knowing the remote nature of a lot of students were remote, and just the back and forth, in and out, hybrid, only in half the time. I was very happy with how many students passed and how few students we had to have retake it.
I think that's a testament, those words are a testament to the students, the families, and the teachers, how much progress students made. If you remember all the learning models we had last year, and I think it's a real testament to the school community overall. But like Melrose, we always strive, we're using the data really critically and saying, all right, how do we make sure we're meeting the needs of our students?
Thank you, that's helpful. Just 2 more things. So for, I know that, I mean, you've done a great job explaining the Iready assessments and the, progress monitoring that's happening, the interventions. But there is sort of that mid-year assessment that you'll do, that you mentioned. And I think it would be great to get, through the superintendent, to get to the committee, just because of what we're dealing with, in the pandemic and accelerating learning, to get that update, either in the form of a report or another short presentation, however it makes sense, because I think I would also find that, speaking as one member, useful going into our budget discussions for next year, and I'm sure it will be used to inform your request to us, knowing everyone in this room. But I think it's always important, it's particularly important this year. And finally, I just wanted to ask about the supports and the next steps that you mentioned. I think it's really a testament to the student body at the high school in particular that they're mentoring and, the peer leadership they're doing, the tutoring for the younger students. I think it's excellent, and I'm so impressed with that. And at the same time, I wonder, you've mentioned some of it, but I'm interested in hearing either now or later if there is more we can do with paid staff, stipended staff after school, in addition to the students. I mean, any creative thinking, which you do so well, I'm just wanting to say, very interested in hearing about college students who might be graduating early in January, or colleges in the area that have teaching programs that might be looking. I mean, we live in a place with a lot of smart young people who might be interested in paid tutoring relationships. So if there's any of that it can be supported through budget requests, I just would be interested in hearing about that, and I just wanted to mention it.
I think one of the challenges, and we saw this through, we've tried it a couple of times with Metco and Amy Jackson's using the grant funding to fund teachers who would stay and do some tutoring. And we just couldn't find teachers who, last year, and I have a feeling if we tried it again this year, using existing staff, I'm not sure we'd have many takers. It's the day comes and folks are like, I can't take this on right now. I think, as you know, we had and Superintendent, I'm sure will share, a hiring fit. We're like struggling to find staff for current positions. So it's worth a shot. I think it might be challenging to find enough folks is one of the things we're finding.
Yep, I completely understand. We've heard that consistently from the superintendent. Maybe there's, other places we can look for folks who are not currently educators in our district. Because I think it's clear that you're doing all the right things, and this is not a comment about that, but if there's any additional resources or help we can put, and over the summer, looking ahead as well.
We do expect that there might be quite a bit of funding from the state as well, so we're keeping an eye on, I think we'll see some movement at the state level, especially around math. I think there's interest at the state level to fund, from the DSE, to fund state math academies and math summer programming. But
Excellent, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell.
Trustee Thomas, please.
Oh, thank you. There is no shortage of data either here or in the packet, so if people are thinking that you're not doing a lot, they should just try to review the whole shebang that you gave us besides this presentation. But it's really good data. Just to kind of put it into context, the pandemic started to impact schools in March of 2020, right? So there was a full year of disruption in terms of the lots of different ways of providing instruction, and a lot of uncertainty of what was going to happen next. For both, for parents, for students, and educators in particular. So the first set of tests that you are giving us data on are from March of 2021, a year after the pandemic started, right? That was the first set of MCAS that were given? March, April, May?
Yeah.
Okay.
April,
June,
May,
yeah.
yeah.
All right.
It was more towards the end of the year because it was after we were back, which was
Okay.
April.
So it was April, May, and June of this year, yeah. So it was a year after the pandemic had really hit us all. And so now we're about 8 or 9 months past that first data point, right? With 2 months off in between for summer break. And then you gave us Dibbles and Iready data from the fall of 2021. So we have these different touch points of data, right? After a year of the pandemic really hitting, and then months of different data, right?
Yes.
Kind of? All right. So, so this year we're kind of getting back to normal, right? Whatever our new normal is. And you're doing all these interventions to support and accelerate learning. And we're seeing again that there's an achievement gap. And the pandemic probably worsened that. But it was there before, and now it's worsened. I remember reviewing the MCAS scores pre-pandemic, and it was all about let's raise the
floor.
Raise the floor. Thank you. Yeah. So that was what we were doing before, right? Now we're trying to accelerate, right? So I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I think it's exhausting on educators, and I really applaud what you're doing, and I can't wait to see the results. But I also think we need to remember that we're a year and a half into this. It's probably going to take a year and a half. Students are very resilient. We just have to stick with this, and you'll get there, and we'll get there. And of course, the first and second graders are the ones that are most impacted. How could they not be? They were learning how to read, and then they couldn't go to school for a while. And then they were in hybrid for a year. I mean, or remote. So I think it's miraculous that we're all still doing what we're doing. And I want to ask you a couple questions, but I just think, like, of course it's going to take a year to a year and a half to get over something that was historical and very impactful, especially for people who were already vulnerable in whatever way. So, thank you for making it super clear who really has been impacted the most by the pandemic. I have a couple questions that are more like detail-oriented. So why were the students in math in 7th and 8th grade randomly assigned calculators or no calculators?
The state of Massachusetts.
Yeah, and why did they do that?
I think that
I know sometimes there's no reason for it.
That's a wonderful question, and when you find out the answer, you can let me know.
I think their rationale was they didn't want to burden students with the whole assessment, and there's something about reliability and validity that they gave half the students half and the other half, and so they feel like that will give us the full picture of what students, they didn't want to overburden students with 6 days, if you're an 8th grader, of testing.
Yeah.
Now, we only burden them with 3. And it does give a full, in their mind, it gives a full picture, because half took one and half took the other. You put them together and you get a whole picture. That's the rationale, sort of to ease the burden and still get a sense of temperature of how students did during the year.
Okay.
Whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah. So I wanted to also ask you, science question. Can you explain the use of phenomena? What does the use of phenomena mean
Sure.
again, and accountable
So-
talk moves? Those two questions.
Sure. So one thing that's really important, and a lot of us may be used to more traditional, here's a science concept, I'm going to go ahead and explain it to you, and then you're going to practice it, and you're going to do this lab or this activity that's very much like a recipe. The idea really here is to kind of lead with the students' curiosities and questions. So a phenomenon is any observable event, right? So anything that you may encounter in your everyday life, it might be a little activity or investigation that we're doing, and we're seeing, we're thinking, we're wondering. So we're really kind of working on building those skills to make some observations, ask questions, and lead with those questions, right? So having the students arrive at the next content or topic with their questioning versus me doing the thinking for you and explaining it up front and then you proving to me that you listened, right? So we really want to engage kids to see the science around them and build those questions, build those explanations, build graphing and data and all of these different skills to kind of be that scientist and really develop those practices. So to have them more student-centered and leading that way, if that was helpful.
And then accountable talk moves.
Right, so again, just framing sentences for students, how we're going to go ahead and first of all engage in discourse. Part of science in just any class really is really having collaboration and sharing ideas. So first and foremost, framing how do we do that? And again, students were out of practice and continue to be out of practice communicating with each other. They might have been typing, they might have been texting, they may have been going through a Google Meet, but just providing that. And so, you know, one notice I have, one wonder I have, and just really kind of leading through the science practices and process. So different classes may be at a different place, different grade levels may be at a different places, but ultimately the kids are driving the conversation when they watch or do something, and you want them to really kind of ask those questions and make those observations. So by high school, you know, you're watching just this conversation go on, and I'll add to that, and then this next, and that makes me wonder. And maybe in 6th grade, we're framing it out a little bit more with some sentence stems for them to express their thoughts and ideas. But that conversation is so important, right? That verbal, it's a form of thinking, and it really helps kind of see where our kids are at and help them along the way to share their knowledge and their thoughts on science, so.
Great, thank you.
In all classes.
Thank you. The other question I have is, I think it's an ELA question there. Grade 10, it was looking super strong, like it was almost like an outlier in terms of the strength there. What's your working theory for that? Do you think it's due to the longer test?
I think in 10th grade, I think they did have the foundation of 9th grade. The teams are working very closely together, and students, I do think by the time they reach the 10th grade, they've built those skills across grade levels. And so even though there was a pandemic going on, they did have the experiences of 8th grade and 9th grade. And I think students come into their own. They've experienced assessments. I think they know what to expect. I think there's power in that, power in knowing what to expect. But I do think in the 9th grade, they get such a strong foundation. And when they enter 10th grade, they're flourishing and they're having the opportunity to really discuss ideas. They're presenting, they're working on projects, they're researching. And even though there was a pandemic, they continued to do that work. And so they had some powerful experiences. And I think by the time, even though things were still going on, when they encountered the MCAS, students flourished. And that was really nice to see. And I think that's when we're talking about these practices that we really want to happen 6 through 12, not only in the English department, but across disciplines. When students use these skills, we're talking about accountable talk in science, you're using these same skills in English, and you can use the same skills in math, and really our students are getting stronger. And so, I hope it continues. I hope we continue to see this trend, and what I hope also happens is we're starting to see that shift in other grade levels.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Anything further from the committee? Ms. Driscoll, please.
Thank you, and I echo my colleagues' comments about your presentation. It was excellent. It was very concise and very clear and flowed beautifully, so it was very easy to understand, and you had certainly all the backup in the narrative, so thank you for that. It was absolutely excellent. Just a couple of quick things. The acceleration roadmap that came from the state, was that useful to you at all, or was that not as helpful as some of the things that you're already doing in the district, if there were differences?
I think it was, go
You
ahead.
just said it, like, we're already doing a lot of that. And I think a lot of the teachers recognized that when we laid out the roadmap. For a lot of teachers, like, but this is what we already do. So I think that's a big piece of it, is that the state said that here's this thing, we're like, it made it a little easier.
I think it was validating. I think it did provide some framework for how to return to instruction and sort of what were the big buckets. But then I think when you dig into the acceleration roadmap, it lacks some specificity about the how, and I think that's one of its criticisms. I think we found that we had lots of resources and tools that we needed to reinvigorate, bring back, and say these are our best practices of our work, and we just need to now, like, we reinvented ourselves. What did we learn from last year that we want to keep and build upon, and then what are some of the practices like talking to each other that we want to bring back and really accentuate that kids learn. I was talking to a 3rd grade teacher. I was like, the kids don't know how to take turns. And so you got to scaffold this back and say, okay, partner A, it's your turn. Partner B, it's your turn. And then slowly take away that scaffold, because they just didn't. They were like talking all over each other and not waiting for each other nor listening to each other. And so those are sort of the best practices that we know have such an impact on student learning in many ways.
So what I heard you say in that is that, once again, Melrose is on the cutting edge in terms of your professional development and your devotion to best practices. So thank you for that. You talked a little bit about student stamina. You mentioned that twice, and you mentioned executive functioning. And what I'm hearing in that, correct me if I'm wrong, is, and some of the things you just said, that talking and how do you practice and scaffold and then withdraw some of those supports to get kids to do things on their own, is the social, emotional, behavioral presentations, if you will, or how students present or how they act on certain days. My guess is that that also fluctuates depending on stress level, or what happened at home, or did they eat today, and all of those other things. But I would like to think that those are, can be sort of quantified, and you would get over time sort of a read on where they are. Are you seeing other elements of social, emotional, behavioral presentations that you can sort of quantify and define and address in terms of student outcomes?
I think we've seen an improvement since the beginning of the year. I think we're seeing kids settle, like there's two groups of kids, I like to say. There's one that did miss a beat, and it felt like the pandemic didn't even hit them, and they're just chugging along. And then there's another group that really felt and is struggling in many ways. But I think every week we're seeing improvement around kids' ability to organize themselves, organize their own space, being aware of their space, being able to listen and take turns, being able to show attention and focus, and for a certain amount of minutes, and then sort of extending it over time. That ability to be independent and complete tasks is improving. And it varies. I mean, it manifests itself differently in primary students, and in high school, it sort of manifests itself a little different. I think at the high school, one of the things that I would say I know has had an enormous impact is the impact of crew, and really, really developing a strong center. They begin every week in crew, in a small group, and are really developing very strong relationships that are then, you get this other adult who's checking in on you and saying, how you doing, and making sure you're making progress and advocating for you. And I really see the impact of that at the high school level, and it's not that it's helping everyone, but it really is certainly having an impact on the school as a whole. So it's a way to do that SEL work, provide a system and a structure that allows for that to be embedded within our work, within the school structure. So there's a real, in the flex block, I think also allows students to be able to get the support that they need among all of those skills, as well as their academics.
Excellent. That's very heartening, and I think Ms. Rosie Thomas said the word resilient, and that's sort of what I'm hearing out of all of this, is even though there are a lot of challenges, there's a lot of resilience among students and staff, and families at home that is super hard in a time of, great uncertainty. So, that's amazing. And my last, it's just more of a comment than anything. I did look at the DART data to compare to like districts, and I was super impressed with where Melrose landed. It's not a competition, but people look at that. Some of us look at that. And so,
What data?
DART. So DART is, the Department of Ed's comparison tool. For those at home who may not know, they take similar kinds of percentages of economically disadvantaged students and in other profiles and compare them. So, I was super impressed with certainly the ELA scores were outstanding. There were a lot of math scores that were great. The growth, I think, the growth wasn't as high because there wasn't as much improvement to be made. So it's like that, there's a lot of context around that, I think. So I just wanted to commend you when other people from outside, people who are looking to move here and become a part of our community, I think what you have been able, and our students have been able to show, and our staff has been able to support, is student learning in a way that shows everybody how proud Melrose should be of the students in the school community that we have. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. Anything further from the committee? Superintendent, are you content?
Yes, I just want to thank the team of folks who came tonight and put all the time and effort into preparing such a comprehensive report. It's much appreciated, and I think one of the things that would be easy for us to do is to kind of skip over all of the data work that's been happening because there is so much on our plates. But I, like you've heard tonight, find it really invigorating to be able to see the evidence of the progress that we're making, and I'm confident that you'll see more growth at the mid-year benchmark. So
Great work,
thank you.
great presentation, and an even better discussion. Thank you for the time and effort. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you.
And that concludes educational programs and personnel. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell, and thanks, everyone. Back to our regularly scheduled order of events here. Next up, we have the announcements of the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Kuchenberger.
Thank you so much, Chair McAndrew. Just a few announcements tonight. One, I wanted to just highlight the hiring fair that Dr. Adams mentioned earlier. We had a fantastic turnout. It was a full team effort. Many folks, Ms. Hogan and other colleagues from the central office came together to really plan out this event and then promote it. And we had a steady stream of folks coming into the middle school last Thursday. I think we have 25, if I'm right, Dr. Adams, 25-ish viable candidates that then have been sent along to the principals. One driver, a few food service folks, 3 crossing guards, some lunch and recess monitors, which was a new position that we just started promoting. I think we were able to secure 1 long-term sub, but we do still have a number and several paraprofessionals or potentially viable paraprofessionals candidates. We will check references on each of these folks. We offered kind of a one-stop shop so that they could come in, they could kind of inquire about and explore, sort of like a science fair, talk to folks who actually work in that department or do that work. And then they were interviewed by principals. I was able to conduct a couple of interviews myself. And then as we were interviewing them, we were really listening to what are your interests, what are your skills, so we could help match them to the position that maybe would be best for them. And then passed them along to Donna Cohane, who took them through the HR and benefits package. Ms. Hogan helped with the queries, and Brittany Ferguson, who's our registrar, if you know her, she was an amazing resource as well in helping keep everyone organized and keeping it flowing. We also had volunteers. Lisa Lewis from the Bridge was a part of our planning team, and then recruited a few volunteers that were the greeters at the door and got everyone registered as they came in. So we are definitely going to replicate this again. Our hope is to do it in the spring and try to get ahead of the hiring wave so that we can recruit as many high-quality candidates as possible. And as you know, this year we had so much turnover throughout the summer. Pretty remarkable as we've started the budget. At the middle school alone, there's 19 new employees. So just think about that. That sort of stood out to me. That's a lot of interviewing, a lot of reference checking. But we're still at it. We continue to look to recruit and retain high quality and diverse candidates. We also are in the process of hiring a out-of-school program and community director, I think is what we landed on with the title. So we're in the process of second round interviews for that. And this person will not only take over the responsibilities of developing, facilitating, improving education stations and stay and play, but also we're looking to bring back the summer programming. And so we have existing Ed Station staff who are passionate about that and want to do it. And we're hoping that by filling this position, it'll give them the support and the stewardship that they need to make that happen. So all in all, I think we all felt like it was a success. There's some things we'll tweak for next time around, but well worth the effort. And I want to thank everyone who is part of the planning and also stayed late to do the interviews and host the fair. This past Saturday, you all know we had our age 5 to 11 COVID vaccine. Anthony Choi, our health director, was the lead in planning that and organizing that. I heard positive feedback all around, which is not how all of these clinics have gone in our area. So I'm grateful for his efforts in the work that he did recruiting volunteers. I believe there were 512 shots administered, and about 212 of them were Melrose residents. So that's super important data, and we're optimistic that this will help make the surge that's being predicted less impactful on Melrose.
A quick update on the fall 2021 season. We've had several teams with some really outstanding accomplishments. We had 4 league championships. That was volleyball, golf, girls cross country, and boys soccer. Our volleyball team had a Final Four appearance in sectionals and states. They did lose in the state semifinals, but we're super proud of the team and their efforts. Golf also qualified for sectionals in addition to earning the league championship. And our girls cross country team placed second in our division at sectionals. They qualified for states and ended the season 12th in the state. And then boys soccer, again, they won a league championship and also made it to sectionals, but didn't get past the first round. In girls swim, we had 2 relays that qualified for sectionals and also for states, so that was exciting. And then lastly, boys cross country placed 4th in our division in sectionals, qualified for states, and ended up 5th in the state. So all of this signals towards what feels like getting back into the groove, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that we are still navigating this pandemic. The winter season will start shortly. I believe right after break, we kick off with that. And then lastly, I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for your service and your volunteerism and the work that you continue to do, helping us navigate this pandemic and staying on track and getting back on track. Also to the leadership team, I've said it a couple of times, but we are still leading in a pandemic. It's been 22, 23 straight months of really intense rate and pace of work, and our folks continue to show up and tackle daily challenges in the name of serving our students. Same is true for our teachers. It's really remarkable the work that they're doing, the way that they're adjusting and adapting to the new and emerging needs of our students each day. And same for our students, our parents and caregivers. We've been at this now for a long time, and as much as we all want to be done with the pandemic, it is not yet done with us. When we look at the numbers, they're rising daily. We had a number of positives, student positives and staff positives in the last couple of days, so that is certainly on my mind and a concern. When I look back at our data from this time last year, we saw a huge uptick in cases after the Thanksgiving break, about the 3rd week after, and then that just rode through the month of December and into the new year. I'm thankful and grateful that we have pooled testing in place, but we need families to also be thoughtful and planful over the break and try to mitigate as much risk as possible. I know we all want to see families and friends, but keeping in mind that the pandemic is not over. So if you're traveling, if you're visiting in large groups, please think about all of the risk mitigating strategies that you can put in place. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Kuchenberger. Are there any questions for the superintendent from the committee at this time? Ms. Rousey Thomas?
I just want to give a shout out to the middle school musical play, The Descendants. I got tickets from Mr. Black because this is one of the many perks that you get as a school committee member, and I brought my 6th grader on Friday night. It was phenomenal, and the spirit that was in the theater was fantastic, so thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations to all the performers. Mayor Broder, please.
2 quick ones. The first is really to double down on the notion of thanks in terms of what happened with the PD Vax clinic. Folks should understand that was it was a tremendous effort, and there's a lot of people to thank. There are the volunteers, particularly nurses and just kind of regular folks helping out. Wakefield Police and Fire in particular were unbelievable. Kudos to the Wakefield service dog that is associated with their police department. Sam really went above and beyond in making kids feel a little bit better. I was there most of the morning, and it's a different set of circumstances doing the 5 to 11 set, to be sure, but the patience and compassion that were demonstrated were really, it was really remarkable. It really makes you understand why local health and the programs that we support and the skills of the folks that we put into those positions really matter. And they did a terrific job, and they were helping kids. That's pretty good. I don't remember the other thing, so off we go.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments for the superintendent at this time? Mr. O'Connell, please.
Just very briefly, thank you, Madam Chair. We can continue to talk about, our struggle to fill positions, and I'm happy to hear that the job fair went well and appreciative of all the work that undoubtedly went into that. What are you hearing from your colleagues in other communities, Superintendent, about this issue? Is this a struggle everywhere? Are there any tricks to turn it around, or is it just we're going to have to slog through this? We've got a lot of unfilled positions, and
Yeah, it is the narrative across the state. Even on our commissioner's calls, he reminds us of different strategies utilizing mass hire. So we just posted a position on mass hire today. We are posting in more places than ever. We utilize School Spring, of course, that automatically posts on Indeed. We use an application called Handshake that pushes out to a number of universities. We also post on some different diversity websites. We're looking to hire a school HR manager due to a resignation. We're kind of rebranding that position and reallocating funds. And so Leah was pushing that out on her listserv. So we're really trying to cast a wider net. The idea of the job fair was to reduce barriers. So for some people, School Spring's a barrier. Having to fill all that out's a barrier. So all they had to do was come in and fill out a paper application that Ms. Hogan prepared for each type of job. So we're trying that. Word of mouth has really been great for us in filling some of the positions. People who know people who have a few hours to give. We're also getting really flexible about, certain jobs that we would have said it's Monday through Friday, hard stop if you can't commit. We're like, well, what can you do? How many days can you commit to? Can you do that on a consistent basis? And sort of patching some positions together. But it's a continuous effort. As you know, we partner with Salem State, and we have 9 fellows this year. So we're trying to also build an internal pipeline. In this spring, there will be some opportunities, much like there were last year, for students, seniors who are in good academic standing, have the potential to work in the elementary schools for either a stipend from the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, or it could be like a scholarship to college. So that's something that we're looking to promote and amplify again. But it really is an ongoing effort. And of course, we're also participating in the teacher diversification professional learning community. That cohort, we had our initial meeting last week, I believe. So just trying to get more savvy about recruitment and retention and learning as we go. So we do think that bringing on an HR manager into the school department, it's been a need for a number of years, as you know. I think that too is going to help us with onboarding, with recruitment, with better supporting employees once we do hire them so that they'll stay. So a lot of different things going on at once.
very good.
But we're not alone, for sure.
Thank you, and thank you for the work. Much
Yep.
appreciated.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much, Superintendent, for that update and for all that you do. Next up, we have the consent agenda, which tonight includes the following: the regular meeting minutes from November 9th, 2021, and the following policies: use of electronic messaging by members, new member orientation, conferences, committees, and workshops, member compensation and expenses, committee legislative program, committee memberships, and the following warrants. Warrant S22027 in the amount of $601,276.09. Officials and refunds, warrant S22028 in the amount of $4,541. And the November debit card in the amount of $91.56. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any member would like to remove at this time? Mr. Abramsky, please.
The minutes from the November 9th meeting.
The minutes will go to announcements of the chair. Thank you. Anything else? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda made by Ms. Rezzy Thomas, seconded by Ms. Disselm? Any comments, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you all. Next up, we go back to the work of our subcommittees, and we have policy and planning with Ms. Disselm.
Good evening. Tonight on Policy and Planning, we have 2 items on the agenda. First up, Policy BHC, School Committee Staff Communications. This comes before us for a vote. I want to, before I dive in and open this up for discussion, I do want to thank Ms. Razzie Thomas and Solicitor Lindquist for helping to craft this. They did the lion's share of work and some background on it. And what we have before us is something that I think clarifies our role as we have students in schools that we can want to go and visit and so on. So for purposes of discussion, I would entertain a motion. Motion made by Mr. O'Connell, second by Ms. Driscoll. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 6-4 and 1 absent. Next up on the agenda is school committee self-evaluation. Please get them to me tonight so that I may collate them and submit them to the agenda. If you are having issues with this, please give me a call or an email and let's talk directly, you and I specifically. Again, let's avoid any impropriety or open meeting law violations. With that, that concludes policy and planning tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Sell. Next up is Finance and Facilities. Ms. Driscoll, please.
Thank you so much, Ms. McAndrew. We have one item on our agenda tonight, a one-time funding priorities, and I will invite the superintendent and Ms. Secor to take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much. At the request of the committee, Ms. Secor and I have been working over the past couple of weeks to pull together a priority list of some different needs across the district. So you'll see here that we have listed them in what we believe to be priority order at this time, but of course that priority could change at any moment. And we're recognizing here, and Ms. Secor will speak about this more specifically, that there are a variety of funding sources before us, and so we're not suggesting any one funding source or any specific timeline for this, but rather, as we continue to work with our partners on the city side, wanting to make priorities known so that we can think strategically, not just within the schools, but across the city as we make these very important investments with one-time funds. Leah?
So in your packet, you got the list in the memo from the investments, and I'm just going to highlight the first few for you. And the first one would be the replenishment of the Special Education Stabilization Fund. That is the stabilization fund that the city holds on the books on their side, and it's a fund that is helpful to us if we have any move-ins or any unforeseen special education costs that happen throughout the year. And last year, we accessed $499,953, and we are constantly looking at our special education population, looking at all the tuitions, and making sure that we're up to date on everything going on in that department, because we feel, at any given time, we can be a move-in away. The next on the list is the repair of the Mhs Elevators. There are 2 elevators in MHS, and they're both in need of repair and replacement. They're both $150,000 each to repair and so what we do is we repair and replace them. We don't take away the whole elevator, we take away the guts. So it's a repair and replacement, and it's for the safety and security, and it's one of our top priorities. Replace outdated elementary literacy curriculum materials and resources. So the current curriculum that we have is a copyright of 2010-2013. And additionally, we continue to refresh and enhance our text with more culturally diverse stories.
And every 8 to 10 years, we look to replenish, and we look at our curriculum and want to replenish it every 8 to 10 years. And we're at the useful life at that point. The next is the purchase of an install of the middle school rooftop air conditioning unit. The middle school is not fully air conditioned. It is equipped with all the HVAC infrastructure to house everything but the actual unit, the chiller itself. I don't think that's a technical term, but we call it the chiller.
That's probably pretty close.
Sounds good.
So when there is excessive heat, there is learning loss, and we await the infrastructure bill and hope this may be eligible in the future. I've been working with Dr. Kuchenberger. I've been working with the several departments around the city to, through the city with DPW, technology, and looking to see all of the needs across the district and working collaboratively with the city and the schools. And we look to also reinstate the CIP committee, and we will be doing that work in the weeks to come. Any questions?
If you wouldn't mind, if you could just walk through the rest of them, that would be very helpful.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So MHS renovate or replace bathroom design study. As we all know, we are all have been in the bathrooms in MHS, and we look to get a design company to come in, look at the bathrooms, and let us know what it would take, just to renovate or replace all the bathrooms in the Melrose High School. So that would be a design study. Replace the MHS championship banner in middle school gym. So that is a part of an update of an entire space. So we plan on, we came to you this time with the banners. Next time, we will be talking about the press box and the scoreboard. Athletics utility vehicle. So the athletic department is looking for it's not an SUV, it's more like a bigger golf cart.
For 12 grand.
So that we can be bringing things from the high school to Fred Green Field and not using our own pickup trucks. Uniform replacement, we wanted to get onto a replacement cycle because we have been every year replacing the oldest uniforms as much as possible and moving on to the next sport as we've moved on. And some of the uniforms also too, you have to replace every year. Microscope replacements. So the microscopes at MHS and MVMS are currently, I believe they are in the vicinity of 15 years old. And when we go to repair them, they're very expensive. So we're looking to replace all of the microscopes in both sides. And then the literature and text refresh. So a same premise as the curriculum. We try to enhance our text with more culturally diverse stories, and we try to put them on a replacement cycle. We find that, we don't get all the books back every time. And a space audit and feasibility audit district-wide. And space audit feasibility study, district-wide. So we're looking to see if we're using our space in an adequate way. We know that in the elementary schools, we are using every piece, every closet, every crevice, every classroom, and we're looking to see if what is the best use of all of our spaces in every single classroom, pre-K through 12. And the district-wide HVAC air condition study. It goes along with the same, premise as the MVMS rooftop air conditioning unit, with all the climate change and the heating of the world, and just getting that many more hot days in June with the learning loss that we've experienced. We really would like for someone to come in and let us have a more idea of what it would take to make the air conditioning in other buildings.
Very good, thank you. Now I'm happy to entertain questions. Mr.
Madam
O'Connell.
Chair, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify what we're about here. As I understand it, the point of this agenda item is to have us coalesce around a set of priorities, and in doing so, to develop some measure of consensus in support of same, and ultimately to help inform one-time spending decisions on the city side. Have I got this right? So we're not making a spending decision here. We're making a recommendation or a series of recommendations. And importantly, I think, as the superintendent stated, we're not by any means trying to dictate where this money would come from. Have I got this right? Okay. So, Madam Chair, with all that in mind, for purposes of discussion, I would make a motion to approve this recommendation.
Motion to approve made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. McAndrew. Discussion and questions on the motion on the floor. Ms. DeSalle.
Thank you. So first, going down your list, thank you for the list. I understand that these are in descending priority as they are presented here, which I find a little curious about some of the priority decisions there, but we'll get to that. Number 2 on your list is the elevator, and perhaps this might better be addressed by the superintendent, but you're in the hot seat, so. First and foremost, is the current elevator ADA compliant? And does this repair allow us to maintain it such that we would be compliant going forward?
So I believe that right now we are looking to replace what we have. What I can do is reach out to DPW and see. They were putting out RFPs for the replacement and repair of these elevators. I don't know the answer to the ADA piece.
I can help, Leah. A couple of things with this. This is the full cost of the repair. We know that Representative Kate Lippert-Garabedian has advocated for some additional funds that may come our way, but this is
very aware of that. Yes.
This is what we think the project costs in collaboration with DPW would be. So when the elevator is fully functioning, yes, it is compliant. However, it works intermittently, and there has been some injuries as a result of this current state of the elevator, so it's a very, very urgent matter, and that's why you see it so high on the list. There's times when only part of the one will function but not the other, and so that obviously there's access issues with that. And we're spending more money to try to keep it running and repairing it than really makes sense at this point.
Very well. Next.
Might be able to bring some closure, some level of closure to that, because we've been discussing this back and forth for some time. Granted, I had no idea we were doing this tonight. I found out when it went on the agenda, but we do expect the earmark to come through, and on the city side have committed to funding the other half. So the elevator should come off the table, should be taken care of pretty easily. They're basically cascading failure, like this part will fail, then this part will fail, and it's been done, somewhat haphazardly to keep in motion, but it's time for the whole thing to just get done.
Very well. Next, elementary literacy curriculum is on the list. As I recall, that was last replaced, and Ms. Driscoll, I think you were the only one on the committee at the time when this happened, back in 2013. So I believe we are due.
Correct.
Yes.
It was 8 years ago.
I remember thinking that it hadn't been replaced prior to that for around 10 years. So it's time. I'm a little surprised it hadn't been done already. I'm a little curious, can you expand a little bit on $50,000 for a design study for the bathroom? I mean, if I were to ask an architect to come into my house and do a bathroom design, they would charge me what I feel would be a king's ransom, but not $50,000. So perhaps you could expand on this a little bit, because what are we getting out of this?
Sure, so what it is a design for every bathroom in MHS. So it would be looking at where they are, redesigning how they are outfitted, and looking at how the building is responding to the children going through and where they are inhabited. Like, as you know, we have the certain bathrooms on the first floor that are supporting the admin wing as well as the children and the adults. And so they would come in and look at the whole building itself and see if we were adequately spacing, as well as the bathrooms itself, like how many stalls, how many sinks, and the way they were.
So I think it's important to also note that obviously these are estimations, as they're all round numbers. Our hope is that it wouldn't cost that much, but we didn't want to underestimate and then have a shortfall. And so just like anytime you're doing a capital project, a significant capital project, which this would be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not over $1 million, probably to fully renovate all of the bathrooms and bring them up to modern standards. You could run into issues of plumbing, that we can't necessarily see all of that. We could run into electrical issues. So that's why you would hire, much like we did with the BB, to do a feasibility study, because we might think the project is X amount, but then once you bring in the experts, you hear about code, you learn about other safety standards, the project can become more costly. So before you start to budget for the project, you want to make sure that you're getting an accurate assessment of what that project will cost.
I think I could put, a little bit more info. So this allocation is part of the 2019 CIP, specifically the design study piece, because of what folks said, it is very complex. A lot of money has gone into renovating the high school over the years in many different fashions, from eliminating the open space to the learning commons to some kind of behind the brick walls pieces. The plumbing hasn't been done. It's original equipment, except for stuff that, again, that suffered catastrophic failure. So we're really talking about, the school opened in 1975. Interesting, with probably more students, but no matter what that usage is, it's, a lot of the stuff is beyond its usable life, particularly in terms of, what we would have loved to have had is touchless faucets and things like that, given COVID. But there are some real challenges there with some decaying equipment, and bluntly, like, the stuff that kids have started flushing down the toilets has gotten much more challenging. Just a little sidelight for you. Kids are flushing vapes down the toilet. That's really bad.
Yeah.
So it very much will be, this isn't like when you rent or you're home and you're thinking about, oh, it'd be nice to have the multi-spray shower. This is, gut and replace and going behind walls and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's absolutely needed. Those bathrooms are in pretty tough shape, both student and faculty facilities.
Thank you. Next question, I promise I only have a couple more. The utility vehicle, I thought we had included this in the current budget.
We did not. It was one of our unmet needs.
It was one of the unmet needs, okay.
And
so-
again, this is an estimate. Could we get one for less than this? We could. But given the way cars are going, I don't know if this is going to affect utility vehicles in the same way, so we give a best estimate.
And just a note on that, I know when I saw this, the first thing I thought of, and then I had to rethink, was the food van. And we
Yes.
purchased the food van, and I'm thinking maybe that's what folks might think about first.
And then last but not least, a comment with regards to athletics uniforms. I know that the vast majority of uniforms, having been a soccer mom, are purchased by the booster organizations and not by the school or the athletics department. So I would support the school buying a solid uniform to go across the district, because right now we've been dealing with a hodgepodge. And that is, I suspect that number, you can come in underneath that number, but we have how many student athletes?
Well, we wouldn't want to replace everything all at once. And what we do currently is that we buy for varsity, and then when varsity gets new, those get passed down to JV, then they get passed down to freshman teams.
Right, but I'm aware that my son's freshman team had a hodgepodge of previous varsity
Oh, yeah, okay.
varsity and JV
Yes.
teams.
Yes,
And
Yeah, like
across
mix
the
and match.
one team, there were 3 or 4 different jerseys.
right.
So,
Yes, we do
My
receive
point-
feedback from our competitors about our attire frequently.
and so to provide a little bit of relief to the parents and the booster organizations who provide, quite frankly, enough, I think that is warranted. Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions or comments? Mayor Broder?
To give folks a little bit of sense of the bigger picture of how this works in terms of, a really unique moment in time in terms of funding and funding opportunities and how to sort them all out. We have essentially at this point, and they're referred to in the memo, free cash, which we traditionally have to satisfy a range that is essentially without qualification, right? If there is this, if I propose and the city council agrees, that money gets spent. We have, I'll put CARES and ESSER to the side because we're not really talking about that right now. So now we have essentially ARPA and infrastructure. The challenge for all of this, as you might imagine, is prioritize it. Is not a bottomless pit. Maybe the infrastructure side is. That's a little bit kind of a remains to be seen. So what we prioritize in a couple of ways is how to identify priorities and kind of rank order them, but also how to pay for them, because that'll obviously shift priorities, right? If you have something that can't be paid for in any particular way, then you might go for, then that's option 1. You might go for option 3, given that it is, a 50% cost share, 100%, because that was part of the theory of the library renovation, right? Is someone's paying 50 cents on the dollar, would be silly not to take advantage of that. So there is, in addition, now this is separate and apart from the CIP committee, which is a little bit more arguably long-term, where there is a committee that has Mr. O'Connell on it as the school committee representative, among others, that tries to, again, project out, fairly significant long-term ways so that, like, I'll use a small example, the uniforms. It's not good practice to go, oh, geez, we need new uniforms, how can we pay for it, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, there's always some nuance, but ideally we set that up on some kind of a cycle. That's the dream, and that's really, in some respects, what CIP is about. Both big ticket, really one-time thing versus the kind of cyclical stuff. So the committee that I referred to, that Ms. Sikora sits on with a bunch of other folks, is processing requests with an idea of, it started around ARPA, and ARPA is kind of the primary driving force for this, but it's also to create a process by which we have a pretty deep consideration of needs with some precision of description so that we know when an opportunity arises, whether or not that's eligible, whether or not we can plug in, because there are some things, I suspect the uniforms, again, to use a very small example, that's not ARPA-able. That is certainly not infrastructure-able. So that is probably a better place for a free cash allocation, whatever the case may be. We have not made a lot of decisions yet. We've tried to really attack it thematically and programmatically, and we're really more on the what do we want to accomplish big picture-wise, and trying to get input on that. One thing that we have done, because there's 2 different pieces of ARPA, well, there's a bunch of different pieces, but one is revenue replacement. So the first thing that was done was to send the school department a little over $800,000 in revenue replacement for some of the things, some of the funding disruptions we had last year. So that means we are now below the $8 million in that respect. But the first allocation of that, which has already happened, is funds to the schools, and we'll continue to work at that. That's why some of these items really should go through that process, so we understand again, sometimes there's magic words, basically, that cover, like air conditioner, air purity, okay, that makes sense in the ARPA bucket, but maybe it's an infrastructure piece. So again, I was a little bit surprised to see this, but it's all, I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of identifying priorities, and certainly some of the lower dollar items are going to be a little bit easier because I think they are, to a certain degree, not ARPA-able, and they're more, like sometimes the smaller things are more appropriate, even if they might fall into one of those buckets, because, not to be long-winded about this, although I already am, sometimes the bureaucracy of it isn't worth the money, because there is compliance and reporting and auditing that goes along with a lot of this that should, and, you know, you're happy to go through an audit process for a $600,000 item, for $1 million item, for a $20,000 item, you know, it might not be worth the hassle. So all that goes into the mix. It is an active and ongoing process, and the CIP committee, the cities, or when I mean city, not city versus school, I mean city writ large, that process is again starting. What hasn't been done very well is that having that as a consistent process over time. I'm happy to say that has changed, in part sparked by the amount of resources that are coming our way, so that we can actually have opportunities to move through the list instead of putting a pin in it and saying, well, maybe 10 years later, if this, that, and the other thing. But that's kind of trying to put a bigger framework around it for you, so you understand what we're, you know, and this is a process that's more than likely going to go over 3 years, because that is the ARPA money, anyway, is commit it in 3 years, spend it in 4. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's the right number. And later on, we can talk about, is there actually capacity in the economy to do some of the things we want to do? Because right now, as an example, everyone wants to run the sewer project because they're essentially free, but it's already hard to get folks in on that. So certainly, Superintendent, I think you made the point, like, around the bathrooms, we'll certainly, you know, we have an ability to go pretty far. We might run into, certainly in the short term, some supply chain problems.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. It's just part of what we have to think about in terms of being able to shift resources or shift priorities. Does all that make sense?
I think just two things that I would add to that is I'm excited with the city capital improvement plan being updated. I think having a schedule is really important. One of the things that we've been working with our DPW partners on is what are those reoccurring capital costs for the school department? So asbestos abatement, we can't do everything all at once, but can we invest X amount per year? And so you'll see as Leah and Jay McNeil and Elena continue to develop that we've scheduled a couple of schools each year. Again, recognizing that it folds into the city's plan, but having that timeline so our community members can see that we're being fiscally responsible. We understand, A, we can't do it all at once, and B, we shouldn't do it all at once, because then it's going to be time to replace everything all at once, which we don't want to do. So having that multi-year schedule, we're looking out 5 to 10 years, and those things aren't captured here. Some of these things on here could qualify as capital projects, of course, based on the $50,000 or $25,000 threshold, but we're putting them here as also a way to think about if and when, as it fits into the overall priorities of the city, here's some immediate needs that we could meet.
Mr. Abramsky, and then Ms. McAndrew.
When we're talking about the outdated elementary literacy curriculum, materials, and resources, do you have in mind what you want to purchase?
Yeah, we've been piloting this year. We have a number of teachers across the elementaries that are piloting Savvis. And so it's one of the highly recommended. It's green all around. If you're familiar with Curate, which is the curriculum advisory through DESE, I was just looking at the reviews the other day and kind of shopping around. And so I'm happy to know that we're piloting that. We're getting good feedback from teachers, but certainly that'll be part of our budget discussions.
All right, great. And then I know this is the last priority, but I just want to point this out. So the air conditioning study for $100,000, that's a lot of money to study air conditioning. Like, so what does that actually look like? Like an air conditioning, like we know it's hot. And so what, like, would the study entail, I guess, is what my.
So we have to understand the electrical capacity of our older schools. We also have to understand, is it just putting in air conditioners, or is it looking at different heating and cooling systems? So you've been hearing a lot about heat pumps or splits as a more environmentally sustainable way to cool and heat. So I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but
Not either.
that's a
That's why I'm
wonder.
asking $100,000.
This may not be the cost, but before you go,
Yeah, I know.
John will do it for 5.
before we go and invest, I mean, maybe it'll be 50,000, maybe it's 20,000, I don't actually know, but I just was thinking about 6 schools, and then also including the middle school and high school. One of the problems we're running into already is that parents aren't gonna wait for us. So I walked into the Hoover School a few weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, and in the library, there's like 3 window air conditioning units stacked up. And I was like, oh, where did that come from? Oh, parents donated it. And I was like, okay, well, don't just go and install those. We need to talk to DPW. We need to make sure that our electrical systems can handle it, that they meet codes, all of those types of things. So again, these are estimates. I'm happy to be way over on all of this, but wanted to make sure that I wasn't underestimating.
No, I get it, and I'm glad it's at the bottom, and, all right, thank you.
And mostly, we put that on there because even though that's sort of like a wish list item, if it fits into infrastructure or something else, this is a good time to do it, so I didn't want to lose sight of that.
Just, as we've done this process, one thing that I have said, and that is part of the group's mantra, is build your stuff, be as thoughtful as you can with the proposal, but don't understand if it doesn't get funded at any particular time, because part of this really is about, we've got ARPA, we've got infrastructure, and maybe Build Back Better. And what, in some respects, it's all about is being shovel-ready when an opportunity comes along.
Yeah.
That, particularly like with the air conditioning thing, it depends what the Build Back Better, it has some climate stuff,
Right.
possibly infrastructure might as well. It might be a situation where heat pumps are very expensive, but someone might be paying us to put them in.
Right.
We want to be able to react to that as nimbly as possible.
And also, doing a study might lead to, yes, you can air condition your buildings in these 3 ways, but you're really wasting your time and money if you don't replace your windows. So thinking about all of that in hand.
Like, so just let me go back for, so like, let's say if you do the curriculum materials, and then there's like 30 grand left over, could you just push that over to the microscope replacement? Like, is that?
So once the mayor said we're going to fund this project, we would then get very precise estimates on these. This is right now just, it wouldn't be, the expectation wouldn't be like we get to keep the change unless the mayor says so.
But for clarity's sake, it's really, because our good friend is going to the other chamber, it's really up to him.
I'm just looking at, I'm looking at I see
He
like
gets
the
2 bites at the apple.
uniforms are the uniforms prioritized over the microscopes, is that right? That's the way I'm reading that, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, all right.
In this current list.
All right, okay, all right. I'm
And
good, thank
part
you.
of that too is because we have other avenues to fund this through operating
I
budget.
understand, thank you.
Ms. McAndrew?
Thank you. Thank you. This is all really, really helpful conversation and context. Thank you to the mayor for going through all of that as well,
morbid
because
detail, yes.
I think, so first of all, just on this topic of feasibility studies and planning studies, there's several listed here. I'm really glad to see them on there, because the bathroom study in particular, we've heard, and the HVAC items, because I think to the earlier point, we need to know what we're in for here for all of those potentially big capital projects, especially in relation to other capital needs that we know that we are likely to have in the coming years. And to the mayor's point, it makes sense to be ready to go, given that we may have available to us several different funding sources for these type of projects going forward. There are also, frankly, things that we have all heard about from the community and from parents and educators and students themselves, particularly about the middle school and the heat and the bathrooms at the high school. So I don't want to lose the student voice piece of that as well, and the parents. I'm sure we've all heard from parents on both of those topics. So thank you for putting those planning studies on here. And I guess just to a sort of very granular question, then a bigger point, the banners. It says banner, but it's the typo, right? It's supposed to say banners? It's all the banners?
Yes.
In the gyms?
Yes.
And so it's updating them. I mean, you just went through some recent sports highlights. It's updating them.
So we
They
just
haven't been, I assume,
Well,
updated in quite some time.
we just redid the middle school gym floor, which was a huge, significant investment that needed to be done. And then when we look at the scoreboard, the banners, and the press box, they're currently out of date and not aligned with our current logos. And so it's an opportunity for us to get everything in alignment if there's funding available to do it.
Understood. So that's also something that historically we have done every X years or something like that?
I believe that the current banners, and there could be alternative funding sources. I believe the current banners were funded, purchased by the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame did.
But again, it's on our radar as something that needs to get done. How it gets funded is to be determined.
Understood. Thank you. And then just the final point, to me, I'm so glad we're doing this, and I thank you, Superintendent, Ms. Secor, Ms. Driscoll, and everyone for this conversation, because I think, as the superintendent said right at the beginning, as is in the memo, we're not suggesting or proposing some sort of one particular funding source for any or all of these items, but quite rightly, in my view, we're recognizing that we are at a point in time where we may have, additional one-time money available to cities and towns through all of these different sources. And while it is up to the mayor and the city council as to when and how these proposals are funded, I think it's really important for the school committee to have a say in what the priorities that are put forward by the school district are, which makes us, for sure, a little bit different than some of or all of the other cities' departments. And so I'm glad that we're doing that. And finally, I just wanted to reinforce the point that this is separate and apart from the operating budget of the schools. There are many other priorities that we all have and discussed here. We talked about our teaching and learning challenges around accelerating learning coming out of the pandemic. We have talked about the mental health and social emotional needs of our students. Those are separate and apart, and I would invite after this very long preamble, the superintendent to speak to this point in particular, which is the interaction between one-time funding and the operating budget, what sort of goes where, and how, if at all, funding some of these items with one-time opportunities, if and when they present themselves to the city, takes pressure off of the operating budget to do some of these other important things that we know that we need to do. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll use the microscopes as an example. If we can fund them through one of these one-time monies, we're not going to put that in replace and repair in the operating budget. So that allows us to either decrease the bottom line or to reallocate those funds to some other existing need, for example, student mental health. So it is part of the strategy for sure, much like we used our ESSER funds this year to decrease the bottom line of the operating budget, but yet still make sure we were meeting the needs of our students and maximizing the potential of ESSER 2 and ESSER 1. We plan to do the same thing in FY23 with ESSER 3. We've already submitted that grant, and we have a 2-year strategy for that. And then we'll also be talking through the budget development process about how do we, what is urgent and important or a crisis response in this moment, and what will be phased out over time, and what will become a part of our daily business or operating budget moving forward. So that's ongoing analysis that we're thinking about, and as we even
work within our current operating budget of FY22, we're constantly assessing and reflecting on, okay, how is this budget meeting the current needs of our students? Is there opportunity for readjustment or reallocation based on our now known needs, and any funding, particularly in personnel, is where there tends to be the most flexibility that we haven't met yet. One key example of that from a sustainability and fiscal responsibility strategy would be the resignation of someone from our business department, and taking that current allocation, also adding some additional funding to hire an HR manager that will make us more efficient and effective, obviously protecting our most precious resource, which is our human resources. So to your point, that is part of the strategy here, to say what could we pull out of what would become part of our operating budget. And frankly, like the literature and text refresh, the middle school has like a 3-year plan to refresh the materials that are in kids' hands. So if we could do that in 1 year, obviously that makes sense. It gets kids more relevant, rigorous materials today, and then we can think about what are the other areas that need to be addressed over time, or reduce the budget by that amount.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Skull.
Anybody else for the first time? 1 second, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Rosie Thomas.
I'm sorry I don't know this, but I just want to know if we use solar panels at all on the middle school or high school buildings. Do we have any? We don't have any, do we?
I don't believe so. I know they talked about putting them on the high school, but
Use
there's
them in the
some
Lincoln,
roof repairs that would need to be done.
the Roosevelt.
I just think it's, in terms of sustainability, it's something that we should look into, especially if we have funds coming in that may qualify for like one-time installation of that. And, you know, just think we got to keep moving in ways that are going to sustain the system and go green and green and greener.
Martha Grover looks at that every single day, trying to find those opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's a very complicated regulatory regime. The good news is, I'm pretty sure the city carries all the power costs for the schools. Not positive about that.
If we're looking at air conditioning everywhere, we should look at that at the
That's a
same
big
time,
cost.
you know. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
And I think
That's all.
there are, we'll check, but I think that there are on the middle school.
Yeah,
Middle school there are.
Yeah.
because that was one of the things, when it opened, it's a green building, right? It wasn't so, okay. Thank you.
Mayor Broder?
Oh, just a matter of, I couldn't agree more with the chair's comment about the interplay between capital and operating. I just think that is true of any budget. That's true of everything on the city side as well, right? Things that we can move in and out of operating, free up resources on the other side. That is an important and kind of fundamental tenet of budgeting that we want to keep our eye on, that I need to keep my eye on, because across, the city side, the school side, whatever the case may be.
Excellent. Any additional questions, discussion? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is to approve the document in front of you. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
6 in favor and 1 abstention. That motion carries. Thank you very much. And a special thank you to the mayor for considering these opportunities in service to the schools, just as you would any other
There's
department.
some good stuff in there, for sure.
And it's a lot to digest, and we're grateful for your consideration. That concludes finance.
And facilities.
All right.
And thank you, Ms. Secor, very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Few items tonight on announcements of the chair. First of all, from the consent agenda, we have the regular meeting minutes from November 9th. For purposes of discussion, is there a motion to approve made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Driscoll? Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstain?
Abstain.
And that motion carries with 5 in favor and 2 abstentions. Thank you. A couple more items. We have in the packet the rolling agenda updated, and I just did want to call your attention to a few things. First of all, let me thank the superintendent and Ms. Hogan for spending a lot of time with me and the rolling agenda over the past few weeks. I appreciate it. And what we have is the full rolling agenda through the end of the fiscal year, so through the end of June. You'll note a couple things in particular. First of all, just want to call the committee's attention to the retreat, the second retreat of the school year, which is tentatively scheduled here for Saturday, January 22nd.
Bless you.
I would like us to begin our process on the review and update of the district's mission and vision statement, which is one of our goals as a committee for this year at that retreat. So I just wanted to flag that date for everyone. Throughout, you'll also see some updates to the school visits and school spotlights. We added the school visits this school year, and we've made a few changes there in an effort to be responsive to the superintendent and the principals and to maximize our time and our agenda efficiencies as well. So we will not necessarily have a visit and a spotlight for every single school this year, but we will have one or a combination of both for every school. So thank you for that. And finally, I just wanted to mention that we are working to schedule a special meeting of the committee on the BB school in particular. And the date that we are looking at is December 14th. So it's not on here because we didn't have confirmation of the date. We now do have confirmation of the date from TAPE, who is the architectural firm. And so I will be getting information out to the committee about that. And I believe that is all I wanted to draw your attention to on the rolling agenda. Any questions or discussion on this at this time? Okay, thank you. And if you, of course, anytime you have questions or items on the rolling agenda, please do let me know. Finally, tonight, are there any outreach reports from any members? Seeing none, just wanted to close with one moment of personal privilege. To say, first of all, let me just, we have a lot of expressions of gratitude tonight, appropriately this week. I just want to thank, in particular, in addition to all the wonderful folks who have been thanked in our district tonight, the people who support the school committee, the superintendent, Ms. Hogan, our friends at MMTV, Pat and all the guys, the city clerk's office for all of their support, our friends at DPW and everyone in the mayor's office for supporting our work and making sure that we can be here in the chamber in person and have our meetings and also have access to the public who cannot attend in person. So thank you all for that. And I just wanted to say it's just been a great honor working with you all this year. I know we're coming up on some of Mr. Obremski's last meetings as a member of the school committee, and but to all of you, it's just really grateful for your collaboration and for your hard work and many hours on behalf of Melrose Public Schools and our students and families and educators. And in that spirit, because I know next time we will take a preliminary vote on the chairmanship and the vice chairmanship for next year, I just wanted to express publicly to you all that I am interested in continuing as chair for next year, and so I just wanted to say that. Of course, that is up to the will of the committee, but I just wanted to take that opportunity to say it in public to all of you. So thank you all. Any other business before the committee at this time? Mayor Broder?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Did you have your hand up?
I did.
Sorry. Was it to make a motion to adjourn or something else?
I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to say that I would be very interested in becoming the vice chair for next year, too, to serve along all of you and to try to support the efforts to make our district be even better than it is and to have perhaps a little less controversy next year. We can figure out how to do that.
In the dream.
So I'm grateful to everyone supporting me in mustering the courage to run again and to serve a little longer here with you all. And I appreciate the work that Mr. Obremski has done along the way, and we'll miss you. but we know where to find you.
Yes.
You're not
Look for me on, look for me on Monday nights.
You're not done yet,
I'm
though.
voting for him for chair. Doesn't say it's got to be a member, I don't think.
Thank you, Ms. Razzie Thomas.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a, Mayor Broder, want to make your motion again?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn made by Mayor Broder, seconded by Ms. Razzie Thomas. All in favor? And that motion carries unanimously. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and beat Wakefield. Thank you.